The maitre d's words sliced through the noise of the lobby. "Sir, you don't belong here." He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His tone carried a casual cruelty, calculated so every guest within earshot would hear. Adrian stood in the doorway of La Fontaine, the most exclusive dining room in the city. He wore a plain jacket. His shoes were clean but worn at the edges, and in his hand was an old leather bag. He hadn't stumbled in by mistake. He walked with intention. But the instant he crossed the threshold, he felt the weight of eyes measuring, dismissing, erasing. The maitre d' offered a thin smile that never touched his eyes. "Reservations only. Members only. Surely you understand." Adrian removed his hat slowly, his voice calm. "A table." For one, the man scanned him from head to toe, lips curving in disdain. "Our menu is highly selective. I wouldn't want you to be..." Surprised by the prices, guests nearby shifted. A woman in pearls whispered to her companion, "He actually asked for a table." Two businessmen at the bar chuckled. Adrian didn't flinch. "One table, that's all." The maître d' leaned forward, lowering his voice but projecting it enough for the audience he knew was listening. "Pay for the cheapest dish on the menu, and I'll give you the best table in the house." The air froze. Laughter rippled through the lobby. It wasn't just rejection, it was a public dare. Adrian's gaze didn't waver. The maitre d' straightened, savoring the humiliation he'd staged. The crowd leaned in, ready for the stranger to shrink away. But he didn't. The injustice was thick in the details. The waiter who turned his back, pretending to shuffle papers, the smug curve of the maitre d's smile, the hushed laughter at the bar. Adrian wasn't merely denied a meal, he was denied existence. If you've ever walked into a room and felt invisible until someone chose to mock you, you know the sting pressing against him then. And if you've ever been judged by clothes or silence before your voice could even be heard, maybe you'll recognize why this story matters. If that has happened to you, share it under this video. Sometimes those stories remind others they're not the only ones. Adrian's answer cut like glass. "I'll take your challenge." The maitre d' blinked. "Excuse me? You said if I pay for the cheapest dish, you'll give me the best table. I accept." A stir swept the room. A waiter stumbled with a tray. The woman in pearls gasped. One of the businessmen muttered, "He can't be serious." The maitre d' scoffed, regaining confidence. "Our cheapest dish is $200. Cash. Now." He announced it like a verdict, each word sharpened to wound. Murmurs spread. "He won't do it. He doesn't belong here." Adrian lowered his bag onto the marble floor with deliberate calm. The sound of leather against stone echoed louder than it should have. The hush deepened. The maitre d' folded his arms, triumphant. "That's the price. If you can manage it." Whispers thickened. "Impossible." "He'll walk away." Adrian brushed the bag's handle, steady, unhurried. He hadn't even opened it. And already, his composure unsettled the room. If you've ever seen a crowd expect you to fail, then suddenly sense they might be wrong, you'll know the tension in that silence. And if you value stories where arrogance collapses, stay here with me. That way, when I share the next one, you'll already be part of it. The maitre d' tapped the counter impatiently. "Well?" Adrian's voice was low, cold. "Then I'll pay." The words rippled outward. Guests stopped mid-conversation. A waiter froze mid-step. Even the pianist in the corner stumbled on a note. The maitre d' tilted his head. "You're serious?" Adrian looked directly at him. "I honor agreements." "Do you?" the crowd whispered. "He's bluffing. He'll back down." No one carries that kind of cash. But Adrian crouched beside his bag, opening the zipper with a sound that carried across the lobby. He moved slowly, precisely, as though nothing in the room could rush him. Inside, Papers and clothes were neatly arranged. He reached for a plain envelope. It was worn at the edges but intact. He laid it flat on the counter and opened it. Bills. Crisp. Stacked. Organized. Gasps broke out. Adrian began placing them down. Not in a showy way. Not slamming them. Calm, deliberate movements. 50s. Hundreds. Until 200 lay neatly in front of the maitre d'. A murmur spread. He actually brought it. Who does that? This can't be real. The maitre d's smirk faltered. He tried to laugh, but it rang hollow. Cash doesn't mean you belong. Our clients have standards. Adrian slid the envelope back into his bag, then produced his wallet. Aged leather. He unfolded it, laid it flat. Identity card. Driver's license. Clean. Clear. Nothing to hide. He didn't raise his voice. Identity. Proof. Whatever you require. The maitre d' faltered again. His eyes flicked around for support, but the crowd was no longer laughing with him. They were measuring him. Still, pride pressed him forward. Money and papers don't make you one of us. You don't look the part. The cruelty landed heavy. A woman whispered sharply, "That's enough." A man shook his head, disgust visible. Adrian didn't flinch. He simply held the man's gaze. Calm. Unyielding. If you've ever been told you don't belong for no reason beyond appearance, you know this moment. Maybe you've had doors slammed on you before you could even knock. If so, I want to hear it. Tell me your story. It might help someone else who thought it only happened to them. Adrian spoke evenly. 200. Paid. Identity shown. What excuse comes next? The maitre d's jaw clenched. He felt the burn of eyes all around him. Guests weren't entertained anymore. They were condemning, yet he refused to yield. Then sit. But not at the best table. That was a figure of speech. Disapproval swelled. A businessman muttered, "Outrageous." A woman near the bar said aloud, "He should honor his word." The maitre d' paled. He had turned insult into wager. Now witnesses demanded he keep it. Adrian's reply cut sharp. "A man's word matters. Yours is failing." The maitre d' felt sweat bead at his hairline. He had expected laughter, applause, the comfort of a crowd reinforcing his authority. Instead, the silence pressed in, heavy, judging. Adrian did not look away. He stood steady, the same calm that had unsettled the room from the first moment. "Your word," Adrian said softly, "was clear. Pay for the cheapest dish, and I receive the best table. That was the bargain." The maitre d' opened his mouth, but the words snagged. He tried to smile, to twist it into a joke. "You misunderstood." "No." Adrian's voice sliced, dry and sharp. "The room heard you. Everyone here knows exactly what you said." A low murmur rose from the guests. People were nodding. The air turned. Where they had been amused by a spectacle, now they were uneasy witnesses. The maitre d's smirk collapsed into tight lips. He tapped the counter with restless fingers, searching for ground he no longer had. Adrian didn't press further. He didn't need to. His silence forced the man into deeper discomfort. At last, the maitre d' gestured stiffly. "Very well. A table. Follow me." But the damage was done. The arrogance had cracked. The crowd knew it, and the weight of their glances pressed harder on the maitre d' than on Adrian. Adrian followed, bag in hand, as the maitre d' led him through the dining room. The walk itself was another test. Guests leaned back in their chairs, whispering. Some hid their stares behind glasses of wine. Others watched openly, curious, uneasy. The maitre d's stride was fast. Almost too fast. as though he could outpace the shame. He led Adrian not to a corner, not to a side table, but toward the central space, the best table that overlooked the entire room. When they arrived, the maitre d' stopped abruptly, his voice strained. "Here," as promised. Adrian set his bag down. He didn't smile in triumph. He didn't gloat. He simply pulled out the chair and sat, his posture calm, controlled. The maitre d' lingered a moment longer, as though expecting protest, but none came. Guests nearby had fallen into an uneasy quiet. The laughter was gone. Adrian rested his hat on the table. His eyes scanned the room once, then lowered to the menu placed before him. He didn't need to speak. His presence at that table said everything. The injustice of those first minutes still lingered in the air. It wasn't erased by his calm victory. It was carved into the memory of every person watching the way a man had been publicly dismissed, treated as invisible, until he proved otherwise. And maybe that's something you felt too. The sting of being told you don't belong in a place, not because of who you are, but because someone else decided what you looked like wasn't enough. If that memory is yours, you don't have to carry it alone. Share it beneath this video. You never know who might read it and realize they've been through the same. The maitre d' retreated quickly, avoiding eyes. His polished shoes clicked against marble, sharp but unsteady. Behind the counter again, he busied himself with papers that didn't matter, trying to escape the silence he had created. Adrian lifted his water glass, took a slow sip, and set it back down with care. His movements carried the same quiet strength that had unsettled everyone from the moment he entered. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't demanded pity. He had only held to the truth, a bargain spoken aloud, a promise made in arrogance. And the man who made it had been forced to keep it. The pianist resumed playing, but the notes wavered. The atmosphere of the room had shifted permanently. Guests spoke in lower voices, their laughter muted. They had witnessed something uncomfortable and unforgettable. Adrian sat in silence, content to let the weight of the moment settle where it belonged. The humiliation no longer rested on him. It rested on the man who had tried to erase him and failed. There is a certain kind of power in refusing to be erased. In meeting contempt with calm, cruelty with steadiness, it unsettles those who rely on arrogance to dominate. It changes the air of a room. That is what Adrian had done. And it was only the beginning. Adrian didn't reach for the menu. He let it sit, untouched, while his hands rested flat on the table, as though he had no urgency. Around him, the tension of the room grew heavier, every whisper sounding sharper in the silence. The maitre d' remained nearby, not close enough to serve, not far enough to leave him be. He fussed with his tie, his posture stiff, his gaze flickering between Adrian and the curious faces of the guests. At the bar, two businessmen leaned close. "He won't manage this," one muttered. The other frowned. "I'm not so sure anymore." Adrian pulled his bag close. The leather creaked faintly, drawing the attention of half the room. He unzipped it, calm and unhurried, as if the watchful eyes meant nothing. Inside was order, not luxury. Shirts folded neatly, files stacked clean, envelopes secured. He withdrew one envelope and placed it on the table. Without theatrics, without flourish, he opened it and began laying down notes. 50s, hundreds, not tossed, but aligned, pressed flat beneath his steady hands. The crowd stirred. A woman leaned toward her husband and whispered, "He really has it." A waiter froze mid-step, tray balanced in the air. The maitre d' straightened. "Cash proves nothing," he declared, voice sharp enough to cut through the whispers. "Our clients don't come with paper bills and envelopes. They carry accounts, credit, proof of standard." Adrian looked up slowly. His eyes locked on the maitre d'. His voice was dry, controlled. 200. Paid in full. That was your word. And I've met it. A pulse of silence followed. Guests shifted uncomfortably. The maitre d' laughed lightly, a sound forced and hollow. We also require identification. Verification. This is protocol. Adrian reached again into his bag. From a worn wallet, he removed identification. A license, an ID card, neatly displayed. He placed them on the table. Identity. Proof. More than enough. The maitre d' didn't move closer. He waved a dismissive hand, raising his voice for the room. Paper can be faked. Anyone can bring notes and an ID. It means nothing about who you are. Gasps sounded softly. A woman at the next table whispered, "Why won't he stop? He's humiliating himself." But the maitre d' pushed further. His lips curled. "Tell us, sir, what do you do? What place do you hold among people who matter?" The question landed hard. Heavier than the earlier jabs. Adrian's response was slow. He lifted his water glass, sipped, replaced it carefully. His voice was calm, even. "I work. I provide. That's my place." Some laughter flickered, not genuine, but nervous, unsure. The maitre d' smirked, emboldened. "Work. Yes, but the kind of work matters. You see, here we welcome leaders, innovators, men of real value, not just anyone who labors." Adrian's eyes sharpened, his tone cold. "Every man who pays belongs at the table he's promised." The words cut deep. At least 3 guests nodded quietly, though they looked down quickly to hide it. The air tilted. If you've ever been cornered like that, forced to prove yourself again and again, when you'd already done enough, then you understand Adrian's silence. Some people don't want fairness. They only want control. And maybe you've lived through it too. If so, leave your story below. Someone else might find courage in knowing they weren't the only one. The maitre d' pressed forward, his smile strained. "If that's the case, then tell us. What's your income? Wealth isn't just scraps of cash. It's standard of life, standing among men." Murmurs rippled. Disapproving now. This wasn't policy. It was cruelty. Bare and desperate. Adrian let the pause stretch until the silence grew uncomfortable. Then, finally, he spoke. "I don't name numbers for men who gamble their word." The maitre d's face flushed crimson. He faltered, searching for reply. At the bar, someone muttered, "He's right. This has gone too far." Another whispered, "Why is the manager still pushing?" But the maitre d' had no way back. He had stepped too far into arrogance to retreat without losing face. "Then we'll see," he said tightly. "We'll see what else you hide in that bag." His words hung in the air, sharp and poisonous. Adrian's jaw tightened. He didn't react immediately. At last, he opened the bag wider, slow, deliberate. Inside were not jewels, not indulgent displays. There were papers filed with care, shirts folded clean, a notebook worn from years of use. He removed the notebook, opened it, and set it flat on the table. Its pages were filled with rows of numbers, precise columns, totals carefully aligned. A man at a nearby table leaned closer. His brows lifted. He whispered to his wife, "Those aren't scribbles. They're accounts, serious ones." The maitre d' scoffed, though his voice trembled faintly. "Anyone can scribble in a book. That doesn't make you someone of worth." Adrian closed the notebook gently. His reply was cold, clipped. "And anyone can twist words to mask their shame." The silence that followed was heavier than any burst of laughter. Guests shifted uneasily, unwilling to side with the maitre d' now. If you've ever stood through a moment where someone tried to break you and failed, you know how silence itself can feel like justice. And if you've been through it alone, you also know why we need to share these stories. Stay close. Stay here, because the next story will be one you don't want to miss. The maitre d's hands trembled faintly. He turned, scanning the room for allies, but eyes dropped away. A woman shook her head openly. A man folded his arms, lips pressed tight. The weight of judgment had shifted. Adrian sat back, collected, his face calm, his presence steady. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't begged. He had only held his ground, and that was enough to make the room question everything. The maître cleared his throat, his voice brittle. "Dinner service will continue as normal," he said, too loudly, to no one in particular. But no one moved. Guests' attention clung to Adrian, not him. The pianist faltered, hands slipping once across the keys before resuming. Even the music seemed unsettled. Adrian rested one hand lightly on his bag, as though to signal he was finished proving anything further. His other hand remained on the glass of water. He looked neither pleased nor proud. His composure itself was a statement. The maître d' had tried to strip him of dignity. Instead, the spectacle had stripped dignity from the maître d', and the crowd knew it. Adrian's calm became the most unsettling force in the room, a quiet proof that arrogance had failed. And though no one said it aloud, everyone present knew this confrontation was far from finished. The dining room did not return to normal. Cutlery clinked in hesitant motions. Conversations stayed low, whispers curling across the tables like threads of smoke. Adrian sat motionless, his presence now the axis of the room. His bag lay by his side, his wallet and notebook stacked neatly, the envelope tucked away again. He didn't fidget, didn't explain. He simply existed, and that unsettled everyone more than any speech could have. The maître adjusted his cufflinks with jerky hands, a shadow of sweat darkening the fabric near his collar. He forced a smile for a passing guest, but it fell flat. The crowd wasn't looking at him anymore. A young man near the window leaned toward his partner. "He hasn't raised his voice once. That's what makes it strange." She nodded faintly. "Strange and strong." The maître d' slammed his palm lightly on the counter. "Enough," his voice carried. "This establishment has standards, protocol, appearances. They are not optional." Heads turned. Some nodded nervously, clinging to the old order. But more frowned, uneasy with his desperation. Adrian lifted his gaze. His reply was a single sentence, cold and flat. "Standards don't excuse broken promises." The words landed like a strike. A low murmur rippled through the guests. The maître's smile twitched. "You think this crowd respects envelopes and scribbled notebooks? Look around. Do you see anyone dressed like you? Carrying bags like yours? Respect is not bought with loose cash." Adrian set his glass down with a quiet click. Respect is not his to give or take. The silence that followed was dense, almost unbearable. If you've ever been trapped in a place where people whispered about whether you belonged, you know this feeling. The weight of eyes, the quiet smirks, the casual cruelty disguised as order. If that's ever happened to you, leave your story beneath this video. Someone else here will recognize it in their own life. The maître gestured sharply to two waiters. "Escort him out." Gasps scattered. A woman hissed. "He paid." We all saw it. A man in a gray suit shook his head. "This is going too far." But the waiters hesitated. Their steps faltered. They glanced at Adrian, at the crowd, at each other. The power of the command was crumbling. Adrian didn't move, his voice cut quiet, precise. "Your wager, your word, before all of them." The waiters froze. One lowered his eyes. Ashamed, the maître d's jaw clenched. He leaned across the counter, his voice hissing, but loud enough for the room to hear. "Do you know what happens when you humiliate a man in his own hall? When you stand against the staff who run this place, you're alone, stranger. Alone. Adrian held his gaze. Alone doesn't mean powerless. That line shifted the air. Someone at the bar whispered, "He's not bending." Another voice, lower, said, "The manager looks worse by the minute." The maitre d' straightened sharply, forcing authority into his voice. "You think you're strong. You think silence makes you belong. This hall will decide, not you." He swept his hand toward the tables. "Well? Do you want him here?" It was reckless. It was desperate. The room stirred uneasily. A woman with a diamond brooch shook her head. "This isn't right," a man muttered. "He met the price. That should be enough." Others avoided eye contact, unwilling to be pulled into judgment. Adrian didn't rise. He didn't plead. His answer was simple, sharp. "This table is mine until your word is kept." Maybe you've lived through a moment like this too, where someone called on others to stand against you, hoping the crowd would erase you. And maybe you've learned how quickly silence can become support. If you know that truth, stay here with me. That way, the next time I bring a story like this, you'll already be here to hear it. The maitre d's hands trembled as he grasped the counter. His voice cracked slightly when he tried to recover. "Fine, he stays. But not one more indulgence. Not one more test." But the crowd knew the words for what they were. Defeat disguised as rule. Adrian sat back, steady. He didn't gloat. He didn't speak. The strength of his stillness had already done what words could not. The maitre d' retreated behind the counter, movements stiff, eyes darting to the corners of the room. But the stares didn't follow Adrian anymore. They followed him. The air was no longer his to command, and everyone in the room felt it. The maitre d' retreated behind the counter, movements clipped and stiff. His hand gripped a wine list so tightly the paper threatened to tear. He tried to regain his breath, to force dignity back into his posture. But the weight of the room pressed harder now. Adrian had not moved. He sat steady at the table, bag beside him, documents still neatly stacked. His hat lay on the polished surface like a quiet symbol of permanence. The whispers in the dining hall grew bolder. A woman in pearls shook her head openly. "This is shameful treatment." A man leaned forward, voice low but clear. "He paid. We saw it. That's enough." The maitre d' slammed the wine list shut. "You don't understand. We protect an image here. We cannot allow just anyone to—" "Anyone?" Adrian's voice sliced, cold and precise. "Your word, your wager, wasn't about image. It was about price. And I've paid." The crowd stirred. Guests exchanged looks, murmurs of agreement rising louder than before. The maitre d' felt his throat tighten. He forced a brittle laugh. "Perhaps you're proud of small bills. But do you know what real wealth looks like? Our guests live it. They arrive in the right cars, wear the right clothes, belong to the right circles. Tell me, sir, where is your proof of standing?" Adrian didn't answer immediately. He reached into his bag once more, calm, unhurried. His hands withdrew a thin folder, edges worn from use. He placed it flat on the table, opened it, and revealed papers stamped with seals, signatures, letterheads that glinted faintly in the light. He turned one toward the maitre d'. "These are contracts, recent ones. If you doubt numbers, doubt ink instead." The maitre d' faltered. He leaned forward, eyes scanning lines. He didn't fully understand but recognized enough. Official agreements, sums signed, corporate seals. His lips parted, but no words came. A man in a navy suit at the bar rose slightly. "I've seen that name before," he whispered to his companion. "That's not a nobody." The whispers spread, quick, like sparks across dry grass. "I know that signature." "Isn't that? Could it be him?" The maitre d' paled. His voice pitched higher, desperate. These could be anything. Staged. Old papers. They don't prove who you are." Adrian closed the folder gently. He looked at the man with the same unshaken calm. They prove enough for those who can read. The silence that followed was different now, not empty heavy with realization. The maitre d' wiped at his temple with a handkerchief, though the room wasn't warm. His voice cracked as he tried again. Even if you have contracts, papers, they don't place you among our guests. Status is more than documents. But the tide had shifted. Guests were no longer uncertain. A man at the next table leaned forward. "You made a wager," he said bluntly. "And he kept it. We all saw it. Now honor it." A woman in a gray dress added, "This treatment disgraces the hall more than it disgraces him." The maitre d's face drained of color. He tried to laugh, but it rang hollow. "You don't know who he is. He could be anyone." And then, from across the room, a soft voice broke the tension. "I do know him." Every head turned. An older gentleman, silver-haired, seated near the piano, had spoken. He rose slowly, cane in hand, and walked forward with deliberate steps. His eyes never left Adrian. "You haven't changed," the man said, voice steady. "You still carry yourself the same way." The maitre d' blinked. You know this man?" The gentleman nodded once. "More than no. I've done business with him, years ago. And if you think he doesn't belong here, you don't know whose company you're keeping." Gasps scattered through the crowd. A ripple of unease rolled through the tables. The maitre d's mouth worked soundlessly. His hands trembled. Adrian inclined his head slightly toward the older man, calm, respectful. He didn't gloat. He didn't boast. He only allowed the recognition to hang in the air. Undeniable. The maitre d' stumbled backward, bumping the counter. His authority cracked. Guests were watching him now with open disapproval, some shaking their heads, others murmuring in disbelief. He tried one last time. Even if he is who you think, this table, this place," but his voice was swallowed by the weight of the crowd. The truth was circling him now, closing in from every direction. And Adrian hadn't raised his voice once. The storm was no longer his to weather. It belonged entirely to the man who had tried to erase him. The dining hall had shifted completely. What began as a spectacle, meant to humiliate, had turned into a trial not of Adrian, but of the maître d'. Guests whispered openly now. Some leaned forward, eager to see what more would be revealed. Others watched Adrian with new respect, the casual arrogance in their eyes replaced by caution. The silver-haired gentleman stopped near Adrian's table. "Years ago," he said clearly, "this man sat across from me at a negotiation. I remember it as though it was yesterday. He said almost nothing, only listened. But when he spoke, the deal was done, and every man at the table knew who held the reins." The maitre d' stammered. You can't mean—" "I mean exactly that," the man cut in, his voice rising. "You have mocked a man whose presence commands more weight than this entire room." Gasps rippled across the dining hall. Adrian remained seated, his expression unchanged. He didn't nod, didn't boast. He simply met the older man's eyes with calm acknowledgement. The maitre d's voice cracked. "That doesn't prove he could be exaggerating." Adrian reached once more into his bag. Slowly, carefully, he removed a second folder, darker leather, worn at the corners. He placed it on the table and opened it. Inside lay documents embossed with crests, watermarked papers bearing titles that could not be dismissed. He turned one page toward the crowd. "This is the deed, filed 3 years ago. Read it." The older gentleman stepped forward, taking the paper. He adjusted his glasses and scanned the text. His voice rang with authority as he read aloud. "Registered property. Title of ownership. This establishment and the land beneath it. Owner, Adrian Cole." The room erupted. A woman dropped her fork with a clatter. A man in a navy jacket muttered, "The hotel, He owns it? Whispers collided, growing into a wave of disbelief. The maître staggered back, pale as chalk. His knees bent slightly as if the floor had given way beneath him. No. No. This isn't... Adrian spoke at last, his voice cold, sharp. You mocked the man who signs your reports. You gambled against the one who writes your checks. The maître swayed, clutching the counter. His eyes darted to the papers, then to the witnesses, desperate for escape. There was none. The older gentleman set the document back on the table, his eyes on Adrian with new admiration. You stayed silent while he tore at you. And still, you didn't expose yourself until it was necessary. Adrian's tone was dry. Power never needs to shout. The maître d's legs buckled. He sank into the nearest chair, face ashen. I didn't know. Please, Adrian stood at last. His presence towered over the counter, over the silence, over the man crumbling before him. He placed his hand lightly on the deed and closed the folder. You didn't need to know who I was, he said, voice cutting. You only needed to honor your word. And you failed. The guests watched in absolute stillness. The maître whispered, Please. I have a family. I need this work. Adrian's gaze lingered on him. It was not cruel. It was steady, unreadable. Work isn't the problem. Pride is. Adrian set his hat back on his head. He turned toward the crowd, then back to the maître d'. You wanted to prove I didn't belong. Instead, you proved yourself unworthy of this place. The maître d's eyes welled. His lips trembled, but no words came. Guests began to clap softly, not the polite applause of a performance, but the sharp, deliberate rhythm of judgment. It spread, building into a wave until the entire hall echoed with it. The maître crumbled, burying his face in his hands. Adrian raised one hand, and the applause faded quickly, leaving only silence. His words cut through it with finality. This hall will not be remembered for your arrogance. It will be remembered for how a word, once spoken, was kept. By me, not you. And the weight of the revelation settled, final and undeniable. The maître sat collapsed in the chair, his face pale, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. The folder with Adrian's deed lay heavy on the table, its presence undeniable, like a stone dropped in still water. The crowd had gone silent again. Not the silence of doubt, but of anticipation. They waited for Adrian's words. Adrian remained standing, tall, his hand resting lightly on the back of his chair. He let the hush stretch, let the weight of the truth press into the walls and into the man who had mocked him. Finally, his voice cut through, low but steady. 3 years ago, when I signed the papers for this place, I had one goal, to build a hall where dignity was never measured by appearances. He looked down at the maître d', whose hands clutched at his knees, trembling. And in one evening, you turned it into the opposite. You gambled with my presence, humiliated a man you thought had no worth. And you did it proudly because you believed no one would stop you. The maître swallowed, but no reply came. A woman at a nearby table shook her head, whispering, He doesn't deserve to stay here. Another guest added softly, No manager should treat people this way. Adrian's gaze swept the room once. Then he returned to the man before him. You tell me, he said, his tone flat. If you sat in my place, what would you do with you? The maître froze. His lips parted, then closed again. His shoulders sagged. I don't know, he whispered. You do know, Adrian pressed. You'd remove me without hesitation. But I'm not you. The room leaned in, caught between the sharpness of judgment and the possibility of mercy. Adrian's words came clear, precise. You will not remain as manager. You've lost that place tonight. but I will not leave you without work. Gasps scattered. The maitre lifted his head sharply, confusion flooding his features. Adrian continued, his tone still cold, but edged with something quieter beneath it. On Monday, you'll report to one of my farms. You'll work as an assistant there, at half the pay you had here. You'll learn what humility feels like. You'll learn to serve, not sneer. The maitre d's mouth fell open. He blinked rapidly, as though trying to wake from a nightmare. You'd send me away. I'd give you the chance you never gave me. Adrian replied. The room stirred. Some guests exchanged shocked glances. Others nodded slowly, approving. The maitre d's voice cracked. I have a family. I can't lose everything. Adrian leaned slightly closer, his voice sharper now. Then you should have thought of them before you mocked someone at your own door. The words hit like iron. The maitre d' bowed his head, tears brimming at the corners of his eyes. Adrian straightened. Your reports, your false praise, your arrogance, all of it ends tonight. If in a year you return with proof that you've changed, you'll have a place again. But not until then. The weight of the judgment filled the hall. Guests murmured in approval. A man in a navy suit nodded firmly. That's justice. A woman at the back whispered, that's leadership. The maitre d' collapsed further in his chair, whispering, thank you. I'll try. I swear. Adrian's reply was curt. Don't swear to me. Prove it. Adrian turned away at last, his presence filling the hall not with noise but with certainty. He placed the folder back into his bag, closed it, and set his hat firmly on his head. He looked once at the crowd, not for applause, not for validation, only to be sure they understood. This hall will remember, he said simply, and with that, he returned to his seat. Calm as he had been from the start, the maitre d' remained hunched, broken, but with the faintest spark of relief that his ruin had not been total. The guests sat in awe, knowing they had witnessed not just a revelation, but a judgment that would echo long beyond the night. The maitre d' stayed hunched at the counter, pale, broken, whispering thanks that no one believed. The crowd's judgment had already been sealed, not by his words, but by Adrian's calm. Adrian, however, did not look at him again. His attention shifted to the young waitress who had stood silently during the spectacle, her hands clasped tightly before her, torn between duty and conscience. He inclined his head slightly toward her. What's your name? Her eyes widened. Clara. Sir. Adrian's tone softened. You tried to keep your courtesy when no one else did. That matters. Tonight you'll take on new responsibility. You'll oversee this floor. Starting now. Consider it a promotion. Gasps spread. Clara froze, unable to speak. Sir, you've already proven more worthy than the man who sat where you stand. Adrian cut in. His voice even, tears filled her eyes. Thank you. I'll do everything right. You already began to. Adrian replied simply. The hall stirred again, but this time not with tension, not with whispers of scandal. With relief. With something like hope. There is a moment after conflict where silence no longer carries weight, but release. If you've lived through a storm and felt the air clear, you know the power of that breath. Tell me if you've had that moment. Your story may remind someone else that peace comes after the noise. The silver-haired gentleman tapped his cane against the marble once. Justice. Tempered with mercy. That is leadership. Guests nodded in agreement. Some even smiled faintly. The sharp edge of the night had dulled into something memorable, not only for the humiliation of arrogance, but for the dignity of restraint. The maitre d', trembling, whispered again. I'll learn. I promise. Adrian didn't turn. Learn by doing. The rest will follow. The words carried finality. The man understood. His fate was sealed, but his ruin was not. Soon, guests began to leave their tables, their conversations hushed but urgent. They would carry the story with them, the tale of a man mocked, only to reveal himself as the very foundation beneath their feet. By morning, it would spread through offices, through homes, through whispered retellings of, "Did you hear what happened at the hall last night?" But for Adrian, it was nothing extraordinary. He gathered his bag. He placed his hat on his head. He rose, as quietly as he had entered. Clara stepped forward. "Your table, sir. Will you be dining?" Adrian smiled faintly, a rare warmth touching his features. "No need. Tonight has already fed enough." He left a small stack of bills folded neatly on the table. "For the staff. For training. Make sure this hall remembers what dignity feels like." Clara nodded, eyes bright. Adrian walked toward the doors. The pianist stopped playing for just a moment, then resumed, softer, gentler, as though the keys themselves recognized what had passed. The doors opened. Cool night air washed in. Adrian stepped through without looking back. Behind him, the crowd lingered, caught in the afterglow of what they had witnessed. A spectacle that had begun in arrogance had ended in humility and transformation. If this story struck something in you, if it reminded you of a time you were underestimated, or a time you learned to see someone differently, share it below. And if you want to keep hearing stories that hold up a mirror to dignity, respect, and truth, stay with me here. Together, we'll keep these lessons alive. And so, the hall that once judged a stranger now carried his mark forever. Not in gold, not in marble, not in the luxury of its guests, but in the memory of a night when wealth was measured, finally, by the size of a man's character. Adrian walked on into the night, steady as ever, carrying nothing more than a leather bag and the certainty that true power is never shown in arrogance. It is shown in restraint, it is shown in mercy, and it is shown in the way we choose to treat those we never thought we'd need.